Maurice Nicoll, Psychological Commentaries, Volume 4, Amwell, Whitson, the 12th of May, 1951. The necessity of forming an intermediary between higher and lower centers. One reason why we cannot get help from higher centers is because in ordinary life we live in moving parts of lower centers. Let me say that again. One reason why we cannot get help from higher centers is because in ordinary life, we live in moving parts of lower centers. We simply talk and chat and so on. One or two strip cartoons in this connection are rather interesting as illustrations. Of course, if you are self-complacent, satisfied in your life, you will not try to alter this. However, it is quite possible that in time, through contact with the work, even although it has never occurred to you to work on yourself, to become dissatisfied with this mechanical way of behaving, which comes from responding to external life through the moving parts of your centers. Let us review for a moment the moving parts of the intellectual center as laid down by the work. The most mechanical parts of the intellectual center makes you continually repeat what you have heard, especially scandal. The emotional part of the moving part of the intellectual center consists usually of curiosity, what Ouspensky called monkey curiosity. You want to find out why Mrs. Smith or Mr. Smith does not live with the other Smith at the moment. Then, of course, the satisfaction of curiosity is very pleasing. Or again, the intellectual part of the moving moving part of the intellectual center consists of making small plans such as, shall I go by bus or walk? Now, the emotional center of the intellectual center means the desire to know or understand. It does not consist of wanting to know why Mr. Smith has gone away from Mrs. Smith, which is from small eyes and uninteresting. Now, as I said, the reason why we cannot be in touch with the higher centers is because we live in small parts of our ordinary centers, mechanical parts. We have mechanical emotions, hatred, love, dislikes, etc. As long as the person does not become dissatisfied with himself from this point of view, he cannot do this work. Everyone is plagued by these mechanical parts of the centers that are almost like parrots, having no thought behind them, chattering all the time. Now, if we suddenly rise to our level of speaking, the whole thing is trying to make connection between our higher centers and ordinary centers, and for that, it is necessary to have an intermediary, the boy, so to speak, who understands the higher centers and the lower centers. Higher centers speak a different language from natural or ordinary centers, which are based on the senses. That is why it is so important to begin to understand things psychologically as well as literally. The natural external mind thinks from the evidence of the senses. The internal or psychological mind thinks from a different source altogether. This is very difficult to grasp. And yet, at the same time, the work is telling you to think psychologically or spiritually and not to think in terms of external senses only. For example, when you think of your inner state through observation, you may find yourself in a very unpleasant place in yourself. Although you are enjoying a fine dinner with plenty of wine, for example. Now, a person awakening will be very uncomfortable if at the same time he is aware that he is in a very bad place in himself, that is, psychologically. No doubt it is much better that he does not notice that he is in a bad place in himself, for he may get indigestion if he does. So it is better for him to remain asleep to his states and delight in the idea that he is going to a fine supper later. That is the difficulty that confronts us when we want to make an intermediary between our external world and our internal state. There are many things that I could quote here from the Old and New Testaments that concern this difficulty. There is, for instance, the phrase, whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might. Ecclesiastes 9, verse 10. Here you might have a magnificent lobster, so eat it with all your might. That is, do not make a problem about it. Yet at the same time, I'm talking about something that is much deeper than this. Man has two sides to him, the outer and the inner. The outer belongs to his external mind and the inner to his spiritual mind. For a long time, these two are in opposition unless they have an intermediary between them. That means a third force, because anything that can intervene in the work is called a neutralizing force or third force. And this third force means participating both in the external and the internal mind. It is no use separating the two in the way of the fourth way. Some people think that everything to do with life is bad. Others think that everything to do with religion and spiritual life is good. They're both wrong. If we can see the good in what belongs both to the internal life and external life, we'll advance towards meeting this intermediary. The point is that the natural man cannot see the truth of this work simply because he has no intermediary. You try to explain the truth of this work to a person who lives in moving parts of sinners, and you simply cannot do it. Is then the possession of a magnetic center the beginning of this intermediary? I will certainly not answer that question except to say that the magnetic center, if it is right, can see the difference between esotericism and life influences. But as I say, you must have the intermediary between the two. You cannot give up one for the other. You have to bring the two sides together into some kind of harmony. So therefore, the work says that everything that puts you to sleep is bad for the work. That is meant everything that you do from your outside natural mind that puts you to sleep in your interior mind is bad. What awakens you is good. But I repeat, the point of this paper is that you must have an intermediary between higher and lower centers. One intermediary, as you know, is that you have to get out of moving parts of the centers, out of this chattering of moving parts, and try to concentrate by attention, learn something that you did not know before. This effort is to put you in touch with the higher parts of ordinary centers, and then you may hear, according to the quality of your being, traces of higher centers. Then you may be able to understand that you have two sides to you, one turned in towards life that you have to fulfill, and one towards higher centers, which you need not bother about unless you wish to awaken in your innermost spirit. The interesting point is that there must be an intermediary. I wonder what all this intermediary is. Shall we call him Benjamin, or shall we call him the pure Arturnus, the eternal boy, as the ancients called him? This intermediary is quite different from heavy intellectual thought and reasoning. Christ said, "Except ye become as little children, ye shall in no wise enter the kingdom of heaven." He was talking about this intermediary between the physical and the spiritual worlds. I think one of the first examples of what this means is that a person gives up arguing with me as to whether negative emotions are wrong and begins to see for himself by direct inner perception that they are wrong without any further argument. So therefore, I think that this intermediary between life and higher centers is quite innocent in its way, for it does not use reason, but uses perception. It simply says, this is obviously wrong, without argument. So therefore, you see that the intermediary is connected very closely with buried conscience, which simply sees that a thing is good or bad without any reason. Now, if you have not any intermediary yet formed in you, you will not be able to see the truth of the work, although you may be very good at the truth of life.